It is my honor to introduce our keynote for tonight. Please come in. Dara Khosrowshahi, CEO of Uber. With Lior on, also from Uber and a good friend of Icon.
Okay. Hi everyone. Yasmin done the intro for us. I thought we were going to intro Dara with the today. Dara Khosrowshahi.
Khosrowshahi, yeah.
Yes, so we'll do the version. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with some warm-up questions. Who has used Uber in the audience? Any show of hands? Okay, I thought so. Okay, good. Just checking. Who has used Uber Eats? Okay.
Good.
That's good. I thought we can start, Dara. So it's actually, I don't know if you know, but today or yesterday is Dara's 5-year anniversary at Uber.
Thank you. We call it the Uberversary, of course.
Uberversary.
So we have to Uberize everything.
It's been quite 5 years. Thank you so much for spending your 5-year Uberversary with us.
Thank you.
We thought we can start showing our the appreciation of the community by thanking you with probably the most Israeli thing in the Valley as a tribute, which is just like we thought you can maybe check orange hummus with $50 of Uber Eats credits.
Thank you very much.
And we actually have Oren in the audience. Do you know orange hummus?
Yes. Absolutely.
So
you're a legend. You're a legend to Uber too, by the way, at Uber Eats. So you're a favorite.
So we came a long way with Uber. We came a long way with Oren's Hummus because I believe DoorDash was semi-incorporated in Oren's Hummus. He's in the S1, but we came a long way. And I think most very healthy, probably the majority of orders today are more Eats versus DoorDash. So yes, making progress here.
It's beautiful. We should have put you in the S1 earlier. I apologize.
Okay, so now that we're sort of sharing a plate of hummus, Dara, maybe I thought we can start by discussing the little place called the Middle East that we share and we all love now that we're sort of eating some hummus. So obviously you you were born in
Iran. Yeah.
And moved to the US, immigrated to the US in the age of 9.
Yes, 1978.
Can you share with us a bit of that experience as sort of an immigrant, and what was it like growing up in the sort of the shires and sort of?
Yeah,
we can talk about the future as well, but
definitely.
How did the story start?
Yeah, so I grew up in Iran, and sometimes I debate whether the things that I remember are things that I remember or I was told, to remember. But in 1978, the revolution happened. I still remember at the time we were in school and school was let out. So it was a big celebration when the Ayatollah Khomeini came from Paris to Iran. And I'll tell you, when you're in the middle of a storm, you never think that the ultimate is going to happen. So for us, it was the revolution. It was like, oh, it's just a disturbance. It's all going to, pass over. It's all going to be okay. And little by little, it became not okay. We had some Revolutionary Guard outside of our house. Still remember holding their guns, how heavy the AK-47 was. And the Shah's cousin lived across the street from us. And some of the Revolutionary Guard had to come through our house in order to get to his house. And one of them, as they were jumping off the wall, their gun went off, and some bullets came through our house. You shattered some windows, etc. That was when my mom said, "We're getting out of here. We don't want to wait this out." So we went to stay with my aunts who were living in or had a house in the south of France, and we thought it was going to be our summer vacation. So I have never returned from my summer vacation in the south of France. We went from the south of France when we knew that things were definitely not going to be okay. We went to Irvington, New York to stay with another uncle. I don't know about you, but one of the great things about the Middle East is I have an infinite number of uncles and aunts.
Yeah. How many
we have cousins and second cousins and third cousins, and they're all my first cousin, and some of us are married to each other, don't tell. We came to the States when I was 9 years old, and we've stayed ever since. My mom and my aunts go back. My father went back because my grandfather was sick. A couple of years after we came to the States, and they wouldn't let him back out of the country for 6 years. He was at home, etc. They just wouldn't let him leave. So I still remember when this is a long story, yes, the very short question, when he came back my sophomore year in college, and he was so short. He was like, when he left, he was someone that I looked up to, and all of a sudden, he was this little man, and he drove me up to college, and I was a sophomore, so he drove me up, and I'm like, hey, Dad, thank you, and I get him my stuff, and he just wanted to stick around. I'm like, Dad, I'm a sophomore, like, please get out, But we, it's a great, to some extent, everything that we went through, my family lost everything. It destroyed my dad, who, his whole life was around business, etc. But we got to rebuild as a family. And I just think to some extent, Americans, I'm an American, a lot of us take for granted what we have. And the ability, thank you. And we just got so lucky that we happened to pick the uncle who lived in Irvington, because a bunch of my family went elsewhere. But my family's rebuilt, and we're incredibly thankful to come to the U.S. And one day I hope to go back to Iran. Who knows when that day will be.
And so the day is not today. So your father's family immigrated, and some of your mother's family is actually still there.
Yes.
Obviously, top of mind for this audience is the future of this. Like any thoughts you have on sort of how this is going to play out between the current regime there, the overall geopolitics reality?
I think it's really unfortunate, because I think the Iranian people are an incredible people. It's a culture that is deeper. It's been around longer than Islam, and Islam has, Islam is a religion. It is what it is. You can agree with it or not agree with it. I'm not particularly religious, but the fact that that regime has taken over in the name of Islam, it's just really unfortunate, because the people of Iran, the culture of Iran, it's a culture that I think has a lot in common with Israel. Mm-hmm. There's a real love of America and everything American, even though there has been lots of fault in terms of how the regime, how America, Great Britain has treated Iran, as the rest of the Middle East. I think this regime has lasted much longer than I expected them to, honestly. I think part of it is that Iran is a very entrepreneurial culture, but also it's a culture that is oil rich and has all kinds of minerals, so it can survive quite independently of the West, and it's done a great job surviving independently of the West. And the people who suffer are the Iranian people, unfortunately. I don't know how it's going to end, but the regime and the people are very different, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of people combine those two concepts. But the Iranian people are not well represented by the regime, in my opinion. I can never go back now, so.
So we spoke about some of the similarities between Iranian and Israelis. I mean, you've walked along the past 20, 25 years in tech with some Israeli entrepreneurs. Any observation you have to share? We share some observation on Iranian, any observation to share about your track record with Israelis?
I think from, the Israeli, what I found in a limited way is that the entrepreneurial spirit that I see Israeli entrepreneurs, it's unbelievable. And there's this entrepreneurial spirit combined with this kind of marketing kind of sensibility. It's one of the reasons why I love you, Lior. Lior he understands the tech. He's as entrepreneurial as can be. He's built this incredible company, Freight, within this enterprise at Uber, which is really hard. It's really hard to do a startup within a big company. And I think to some extent, those are kind of some of that Israeli edge, but then with like this sniff, this kind of smell of opportunity.
Yeah.
There's a saying in Iranian, I don't know if there's an equivalent in Israel, which is there's this bazari sensibility, which is where the business is, and you don't require a straight line. You'll kind of figure your way around, and chaos doesn't bother you. And so I think that kind of entrepreneurship is something that is not necessarily found in Western countries where it's much more structured, et cetera. So it's, I see it in you, and one of my goals, obviously, is to build that relationship with Israelis. And I hope one day, you can have that kind of Iranian entrepreneurialism as well. But, that'll happen one day.
Thank you for joining us and sharing. So let's go back to you and talk a bit about your career. And a very storied career. You grew up in the US and actually went to study electrical engineering at Brown University.
Brown, yeah.
So you started, like many of us in the audience, as a geek. And then you chose to go to the dark side of the force and go to finance and iBanking. Why? Or what have you learned in your engineering education that then you applied later in life as well?
So I think part of the Iran culture is you're either a doctor or an engineer or you're nothing. So I was a disappointment. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. Yes. I became an engineer. And then the reason why I went to finance is because I fell in love with a girl in New York City.
Oh.
So I had a job in engineering, et cetera. I was going to get deep into tech, et cetera. But I could only find a job in finance in New York. Of course, I broke up with her 3 months later, so go figure. But I stayed in finance for 8 years. I went to work for an investment bank in New York City. But then, my heart wasn't in it. I wanted to go build things. So I've always wanted to kind of get back closer to running business. But I think just the training in engineering for me, the ability to break down complex problems into their component parts has been invaluable. I find that a lot of people kind of they embrace the complexity in systems. I love simplifiers. It's for me, what engineering has taught me is take, complex ecosystems with lots of different inputs, break them down into the component parts, ignore the noise, look for the signal, and then build on the opportunity that you see based on that signal. So it's been incredible, amazing training for me. Whether you go into a technical field or not, I think engineering as a background is extraordinary.
And I can attest from firsthand that Dara definitely holds his weight on machine learning and data science and very tough engineering problem. Our head of data science at Freight is Israeli. And when they start geeking out on the latest algo, I lose them 20 minutes into the discussion, and I sort of slowly exit the room and allow them to go even deeper.
Definitely.
Okay, so engineering to finance, and then you always wanted to build, and an opportunity presented itself to go and build. Tell us a bit about sort of how you became an operator or a CEO out of that sort of more finance.
It was a long road, and I think there are lots of accidents happened along the way to get me there. But I'd say the most important event for me was meeting Barry Diller. Mm-hmm. So Barry Diller, for those of you who don't know, great U.S. entrepreneur, started in the entertainment business, and was the youngest. He ran Paramount, he ran ABC, and then he went into home shopping, QVC, HSN, et cetera. And I met him as a young banker. I was an analyst on a hostile tender offer where he was running QVC, which is a small home shopping company, and he launched a hostile tender offer against Paramount, which was a company 10 times their size. And I still remember Barry, we were dealing with enormous amounts of leverage. It was just fly by night, this crazy bidding process, et cetera. And he wanted to know who was building the models to support kind of the bids that we were making. And he didn't want to talk to the managing director. He didn't want to talk to the vice president. He didn't want to talk to the associate. He wanted to know who's building this model. And I want to sit down with this person and understand all these numbers that I'm being fed. And I was the person who was building the models. So he sat down, he dragged me, he's I don't want anyone else in this room. And one of the lessons that I've learned from him over a period of time is the higher up you go into organization, the more you get filtered. Like the universal truth is the higher up you go, the less you really understand what's happening. And so he did a really unusual thing. Like he's like, I don't want anyone else in the room. I'm sitting down with this 20-something-year-old, and I'm going to make him explain everything to me. And I want none of it. And, I'm scared shitless here with this guy who's absolutely fearsome. 3 hours later, he would come back to me every single time. So once I met him, et cetera, my view was, I just want to work for him. I just want to work for Barry. So we lost that tender offer. We lost it, but I kept being his banker. And at one point, he wanted to go out and start this company called Interactive Corp, IAC. It was a result of a bunch of mergers and acquisitions. And I asked if I could go work for him. I did. He said yes, which was really lucky for me. And then I kind of went through a bunch of different steps. I was his deal person because that was my skill originally. I became the CFO. And at one point, we had built a bunch of different travel companies. And the head of that travel company, it was Expedia, Hotels.com, Hotwire, et cetera. The travel company started falling into trouble. The CEO of the company quit. He was a startup person. It wasn't, startups and turnarounds. Startups sometimes become turnarounds. This became a turnaround. He didn't want any part of it. He's a great person. And so at that point, I volunteered to run Expedia. And again, I was lucky and Barry didn't have any other choices, so he said yes. And that's ultimately how I became CEO, and then obviously Uber happened. So it's a bunch of accidents. And one of the pieces of advice, y'all are starting things up, but I always tell people, don't over-plan your career. I see, if I could have never, ever planned to get to where I am now. And what happens is, confirmation bias is so strong. It happens all the time. And the minute you start having a good view of where you're going to go with your career, I'm going to in this industry, or I'm going to be this, at this level, or I'm going to make this much money, all you do is look for signals that confirm that bias. So for me, I've just been I don't know what the hell I'm going to do, but I'm going to look at opportunity. And so for me, what got us here is just random opportunities that I was open to. And I made some lucky choices, and here I am.
And you also prepare yourself for the luck and to have great choices by working and following people that you admire. And I think one of the things that I see entrepreneurs, especially Israeli entrepreneurs from time to time do, is maybe not doing enough of that. Can you talk about so much of your ability to grow is also surrounding yourself with great mentors? I mean, Barry was a mentor, Ron Sugarby to some degree today. What would be your advice in terms of how to cultivate those relationships with mentors and how to really leverage incredible people around you in your network?
I'd say first is make yourself useful, right? So whenever I look for a mentor, the first thing I do is I figure out how I can make myself indispensable to that mentor, and that's a first step. And then I ask and I make sure that I engage with that mentor. I remember there was one of the first gentlemen that I worked with in banking, Enrique Senior. He had a rule, which is he's like, Dara, you're going to come in here, you're going to give every waking minute of your life to me, and I expect it to be high quality. Once every 2 weeks, we're going to have lunch, and I'm going to give an hour back to you. And he said, use that hour well. And I was killing myself. But during that hour, I was pulling everything that I could from Enrique. But it all started with making myself useful. And so I just think, I haven't sought members, et cetera, one way or the other. I'm just not that structured, a brain, if you want to call it that. But one of the early lessons for me was you make bets on people. And you made a bet on me, I made a bet on you, et cetera, at all levels, et cetera. And there are a few people in my life who I've made bets on, and I like to bet big on people. Barry's one of those people. Herbert Allen at Allen & Company is one of those people. Ron Sugar, who's our chairman, is another one of those people. But it all starts with making yourself useful, because when you want to ask of them, you want to kind of have built up your equity, so to speak.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, so the other thing, we'll get to Uber in a second, but the other thing that people might not know about you is that you're a phenomenal capital allocator, both in your companies, before Expedia or Uber today, but also as an investor. I mean, we have a room full of entrepreneurs looking for investment or looking to partner with companies like Uber. How do you think about investing, and what are the things that you're looking for, and how do you think about sort of like making choices? That's like one of your major responsibilities, like constant capital allocation, to your point, also betting on people. But what are the things that you're looking for, and how do you make those decisions?
So I do think that capital allocation is, my number one job as a CEO is to attract the best talent into this company, build a strategy, build a culture, and operate the business profitably. And so near term, that's the goal. But over 5, 10, 15 years, capital allocation can make a huge difference in terms of the results of any company, and it's a big deal. One is I love going counter to the market. So if I look for spaces that are absolutely hated by others, because that's when the opportunity comes in. I don't like jumping in. If there's momentum, I'm going to be late to the party, and especially if you're a company like ours. VC, you can get into the momentum, you can get into the ground floor. By the time you get to companies of our size, if you think you're at the ground floor, there are people who are like streaming out of the room and saying, "Thank God the idiot got in," when they got in. So at my level, and generally, as my instinct is, I just love to look for opportunities where things are hated. And for 3 to 4 years, it's going to suck, because usually the cycles of hatred, or love, they're usually 5-year cycles, right? And so you really have to be prepared. So part of capital allocation is what allows you to be aggressive is to actually be very conservative as it relates to your balance sheet and as it relates to need for liquidity, and making certain that you basically are covered for liquidity for the next 5 to 10 years. Because once you're covered and you know that you're not going to risk the enterprise, you can be fearless. And I think the Buffett saying is, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. Then that allows you, if you have a longer than 5-year time frame, to get in when others are hating. So I actually think like this is if you talk to investors or investors in public markets, et cetera, they say like, "Oh my God, don't invest in stuff, don't go after new stuff." This is a great time, I think, for us to start looking for opportunity. I think that the environment's going to be pretty damn bad for the next 2 to 3 years. If you're an entrepreneur, save your shekels, so to speak. But for investors, it's a great time to invest. But the number one priority is make sure you're safe. And then once you're safe, you can be fearless. But I love going where they ain't. That's a fun part. Maybe it's because I'm a little bit of an outsider, et cetera. But that's where you make the real money.
So speaking of non-orthodox or contrary choices, 2017, 5 years and a day, you get a call, or somehow somebody from Uber contacts you. Like the company is complete like chaos, burning money like
going to
crazy,
something that people hate.
Completely counter-cyclical. The house is burning, and yet you're joining. Like, what the heck? Like, why? What happened there?
I love pain. So it's actually, the story's a little bit of a funny story. I was having drinks with a friend of mine, Daniel Ek, who's the founder of Spotify. Incredible entrepreneur. Like, you should get him here if you can. And Uber was in the news in all the wrong ways, and there was the whole drama of who's going to be the next CEO, all that stuff. He said, "Dara, a headhunter called me regarding the Uber job, and I told the headhunter that you would be great for the job. Did they contact you, et cetera?" And I was with my wife, Sid, and I'd had maybe way more than a drink. And I said, Daniel, like, why would I ever do that? I've been in Expedia for 13 years. I'm doing great. I'm happy. This is like, it's great. Why would I, be so crazy to take on the Uber role? And Daniel looks at me with his like these blue, deadly Scandinavian eyes and goes like, Dara, since when is life about being happy? He goes, it's about having impact. And so I'm like, impact, yeah, it's so cool. So, and Sid says like, sure, we can go for it. So definitely alcohol helps in these kinds of decisions. It really helps you make really good, well-considered decisions. But then, so I answered the call of the headhunter, and I had a couple of discussions about Uber. And it goes to, you don't have that many chances in your life to make impact. And Uber is a company that, so many of you use here. It's a global company. And I related this to the last group. I talked to my dad, and my dad, like, he just said it perfectly, which is, Dara, when a company who's a verb asks you to run it, you just say yes. So I was like, if it's a verb, you want me to be CEO? I'll take it on. And it was, I was in a good place in my life financially. I was in a good place. I was in a position to take risk. And a friend of mine asked me, he's like, are you having fun? I was like, no, but I love it. Like, I love it. It's not fun. It's been really hard. But it's been the most extraordinary experience for me professionally, and it's important enough where it's also been like personally, it's been awesome.
So 5 years and a day.
Yeah.
Never a dull moment, and definitely hard. I want to talk a bit about those 5 years and maybe two themes and topics that you've really prioritized and made an incredible impact. I'll say sort of a full turnaround. The first one is culture. So you come in 2017, you find a certain culture. Maybe you can share with us a bit about that journey, like how did you even choose where to start? And then I think a lot of the entrepreneurs here are thinking about how to set a culture in their company specifically for scale. Not only you set a scale culture, you're able to actually turn around an existing culture. Like, how do you choose, how do you prioritize it, and how do you actually make culture stick and some of those changes you've made?
Yeah, sure. And Leo, you've been in this journey with me. And,
yes.
And I'd say, like, we didn't get it all right, okay, by any means. And I think the interesting thing about Uber is, while there are lots of headlines, or there were at the time there were a lot of headlines about how Uber culture was terrible, there's a bunch about the Uber culture that was absolutely great. It was a scale company that had this dynamism, that had this entrepreneurial culture, that had this go-get-it culture. It's like stopping at nothing, which, by the way, can be really bad sometimes, right? In order to get to the results, you were expected to walk through walls, right? And sometimes it was walk through regulations, right? Sometimes, and this is negative, you would do things that were unsafe, et cetera. So there was this really great part of the culture that then went too far and got weaponized. Uber was the ultimate disruptor that was going out, taxi lobby, et cetera, changing the world, et cetera. And at some point, they went from being disruptor to being the incumbent, but they were still using disruptor tactics. And if you're the incumbent and you're using disruptor tactics, you kind of look like a bully, okay? But it came from a place that I believe was good that just got weaponized. So one example for this group is like everything you really have to watch out for, so much can get weaponized, there was a culture at Uber called toe stepping. Okay, and the idea behind that culture was, I'm not gonna be afraid of stepping on your toe and telling you something that you don't wanna hear, because it's important for you to hear that. And so the intent was a really good intent. As you get bigger at companies, et cetera, people don't wanna disagree, they wanna be respectful, but then you don't talk about the real shit, right? But then toe stepping got weaponized to become, you're allowed to be a jerk. And so that's the one thing, which is one of the things that I recognized with Uber was There was so much that was good about the culture, but it became weaponized, it went too far, et cetera. So when we first came in, it was very, very important for me to set a tone and send the message to the company that we have to reform the culture of the company, but recognize that there was a lot of the original culture that was great. So there were older cultural values, some of whom we kept, and then newer values that we added that were different, et cetera. And the one that has rung, I would say, most loudly around the halls was, we do the right thing, period. And there was a question when we put that culture up, do the right thing, period. It was like, well, tell us what the right thing is. And usually our culture is like, we have a bunch of write-ups, what this means, great minds don't think alike, what it means, et cetera. With do the right thing, there's no explanation. And the message of the company is, every single employee at Uber is expected to do the right thing, and there's no guidebook for doing the right thing. It's your judgment as a person. We're not going to tell you what that means. If you have a question, ask Lior, et cetera. So, and when we first reformulated culture, I actually think culture is something that's constantly changing, it's constantly moving. The minute you stop working on culture, you're on your way to very, very quick failure. So I don't think we've succeeded at this point. Like, you have to feel like you haven't succeeded to keep that edge around culture, because changing how you work, like changing what you do, changing strategy, changing priorities, all that stuff is easy. Changing how you work is really hard. So you have to every day put the pressure on cultural values. It goes to little stuff, using cultural values in your lexicon. When I'm at all hands, I will say, this is a one Uber kind of thing to do, or this is all about doing the right thing. And it's a little cheesy, using those words and quoting yourself and quoting the culture all the time. But you just have to keep that repetition. And over a while, after pounding for 5 years on these cultural values, and some of them are old, really cool cultural values. There's one we say, go get it, which is that's the entrepreneurial mindset. That's the embracing the grind at this company, where it's we love to take on hard things. If you keep working on it, then the culture slowly turns. But there's a lot, one of the things that I love about Uber is actually the best of the old culture. And we've held on to some of that, and then we've combined it with a new. And I think we're in a good place now, but the minute we forget, it's all going to go downhill, and it's all going to get weaponized. And it's a real watch out. It never, ever ends. You got to stay so hardcore on culture. It never ends. The work never ends there.
So switching from the values and a bit of the EQ to the numbers. Let's talk about numbers. Let's put the financial hat back on. And the other thing that throughout those 5 years you were just unwavering about, and just absolute sheer focus on A, focus, and B, unit economics and profitability. Mm-hmm. And there's still sort of varying degrees of understanding, I think, even in the audience, on where Uber is at on the journey to profitability. If you can just share some of the journey and sort of the focus, and then where are we as a company on that road to profitability?
Yeah, sure. It's
financial health.
It's been a long road, and I'll go quickly. One is, when I first joined, it was growth at all costs. It was the go-go days, and companies were rewarded for growth more than anything. So we weren't thinking so much about the unit economics. It was much more about our share inside of a marketplace. And there's this network effect that I think a lot of you have heard, which is the more drivers you have, the better your service, the better your ETA is, the more prices, the more riders you get, the more eaters you get, the more restaurants you get, which then helps you get more drivers, and you get this wonderful kind of positive network effect. Same thing with truckers and shippers, et cetera. And then the more data that you have, the more connections that you have in this marketplace, the better you can price, the better you can route, and ultimately the better the service gets. So the early years were spent on essentially spending on our brand, reformulating culture, reformulating leadership, but then spending to grow and spending to get a significant category position in all the markets that we're operating, and then growing Eats, which came from nothing, and then growing Freight in order to hit more trillion-dollar marketplaces. Then the pandemic hit. And so we were a company that was losing $3 billion a year, and our rides business was profitable and was going to the profit generator of the business, and we lost 85% of our volume overnight. It was brutal. And that actually forced us to make really hard choices. And that was the switch, I would say, with growth at any cost to what is truly, truly important to the company. I had to lay off 25% of our workforce. Never would I have thought I'm coming to run Uber and to do a layoff. I think it was 6,000 people that we laid off. It's terrible. I didn't want to cut costs in a peanut butter way. I think that's a disaster. So we had to identify specific businesses that we were getting out of 100%. And then we had to cut elsewhere too, because it was an emergency situation. So we disposed of our autonomous team. You were very involved with that group. We were building bikes and scooters. We had Uber Works initiative going on. There were a bunch of initiatives that we just let go of wholesale. And then we had to cut into the rest of the business. Lior's team, Freight, we're like, Freight's part of the core. But that was a real decision. Like, we had real discussions about that. We really identified the core of the business. And that focus, one is the Eats business then blew up in a wonderful way. So our Eats business is just as big as our Rides business, really accelerated. Our Freight business is doing great as well. But that allowed us to bring the unit economics and brought a spirit of not just growth, but also cost control, discipline, grinding out unit economics to where we are now, which is the business is at about $120 billion run rate in terms of top line. And we've been EBITDA, earnings before depreciation, amortization, profitable for 4 quarters. And we became free cash flow profitable, $380 million in free cash flow this last quarter. Thank you. And the business now, we're in a situation where we're going to be able to grow top line and bottom line and get to GAAP profitability. We're the world's largest mobility player. We're the world's largest delivery player outside of China. And Freight, where are we in the digital brokerage space now?
We'll do almost $8 billion of top line, profitable, almost $1 billion of net revenue. So definitely healthy. Actually, yeah.
And there are 3 big segments of the business. And what's cool is, like, a lot of people don't understand, like, what's Freight doing within Uber, et cetera. But the real beauty of Uber is building liquidity within these marketplaces, but then being able to price, every single time that you take a ride, we are finding the right driver for you. We're pricing out that trip. The price that you pay is actually decoupled from the price that we pay the driver. The routing decisions, the matching decisions, et cetera, all of those same kind of decisions are being made when a shipper says, I want to ship I need a truck to go from St. Louis to Boston. And so essentially, in order for you to be able to price out and get that trucker to take that trip, you have to build liquidity within that origination destination, and the routing, the pricing, like a bunch of the tech is actually the same. And it's ultimately, when you build that liquidity, the data advantage that we have and the AI algorithms that are matching these two, the supply and demand on a real-time basis, that's the magic. And fortunately, now we build this platform that's able to connect supply of all things that move, whether they move people or whether they move food or pharmacy or truckloads, to demand for that movement. That's essentially, ultimately, what Uber is all about. And things go wrong all the time, but then having algos essentially deal with the real world and adjust to those issues, that's where the magic happens.
So speaking of Freight, I think I shared the stage with Dara, I forgot, like when, 5-6 years ago? So like, we're gonna start Freight, it's like Uber for trucks, like we have like 10 trucks and like 1 shipper in Dallas. We came a long way. Also, thank you for your continued support. So just, a bit, $8 billion top line, $800 million net revenue, profitable, almost 2 million truck drivers on the platform, 10,000 shippers. We move like 15% of all Coke in the US, 15-20% of Pepsi, half of every mineral water bottle. So It's big.
Not big enough.
Why? Okay, good. So let's talk about the beginning and the end. First, what gave you the confidence to even invest? Maybe it's your contrarian nature, but doing logistics in 2017 was so sort of counter-cyclical. Now, yeah, logistics is the most important thing. It's the center of society, but that was not a given when you had to make allocation choices in 2017, 18, 19.
Well, first of all, I can never say no to an Israeli. So Lior was pitching me, and he gives good pitch. He's really good at what he does. But I say for me, it's always been pattern recognition. And, in the olden days, when you wanted to get a taxi, you would call a taxi dispatcher. And that taxi dispatcher would then blow out that offer to a bunch of taxis, and taxi number 57 would say, yeah, I'll go pick up Lior at his house. And that's exactly how the freight business was, and is actually now, right? A shipper wants to ship again from point A to B, calls a broker who's a fancy dispatcher. The broker knows truckers in this route, quotes a price, and then goes and finds a trucker to do it. And so all of it was offline, incredibly fragmented, powered by people with spreadsheets. And so for me, the opportunity was just so blindingly obvious, and the ability for us to take that offline process, move it online, build liquidity and density in the marketplace, price it out in a way that is superior to human beings, it just seemed like a great opportunity at the time. And ultimately, so it was a bet on opportunity, it was a bet on a person. It was a big bet that we made on Lior, and so far it's working out, although his growth isn't quite where I want it to be, so.
Okay, good. Let's talk about that a bit. No, I have the spreadsheet here in my pocket. Big, but not big enough. Can you maybe educate us a bit on our ambition for our, should I call it freight business or logistics?
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, it goes to pattern recognition. I always like getting a foothold and then looking at adjacent categories for us to move into. So if you think about Uber, Uber was about rideshare, right? But what we're looking to do, is essentially now we are moving from rideshare to essentially being about getting from point A to B. Any vehicle that can carry you from point A to B, we're going to have on the platform. So pretty soon, San Francisco Taxi is going to be on Uber. 10% of Uber users in New York are able to e-hail cabs. We're wiring up buses, we're wiring up subways. We'll have real-time information, and essentially we will offer up to you based on what we know about you, your price sensitivity, your ETA sensitivity, et cetera, the three choices that are perfect for you to get from point A to B. So we've gone from rideshare essentially to mobility from point A to B. Same thing as it relates to delivery and eats, as we started with food, and hopefully you've seen some of the Don't Eats campaign. Now we're using that same marketplace tech, et cetera, to deliver now as groceries and pharmacy and liquor. If you order an iPad on the Apple Store, Apple will offer you the opportunity to get that iPad delivered same day, and that is an Uber Eats courier who's picking up that iPad and delivering it to you. Same thing with Walmart. Hundreds of merchants all around the world essentially using our fulfillment platform. So Eats has gone from food to essentially anything on demand in your marketplace. And I've told Lior, we will know that we've succeeded with freight when he has a naming problem, just like we have a naming problem with Uber Eats, it's more than Eats. We use that to our advantage, ultimately we want freight to be more than freight. So Uber's freight started with digital freight brokerage. We acquired a company called Transplace, which is now running the brokerage systems and actually logistics systems for companies. They are kind of the outsourced intelligence for these companies. So we've expanded now upstream, and ultimately we think that we can bring a lot of the technical know-how into the logistics marketplace, whether it's managing warehouses, scheduling, et cetera. Ultimately, the goal for Uber Freight is not to be the largest, freight brokerage player, but ultimately to be one of the biggest digital logistics players in the world.
No pressure. Yeah. Okay.
Small ambitions.
We'll try. We'll do it. We'll do it.
And we have time.
We have time, yeah. We're very patient. And
Yes.
we have a very patient capital parent here.
Yes.
Two, actually. Oren is also sitting there. So, we have
How are you?
two capital parents here. Okay, maybe last question or two. So, talking about Uber. Let's talk about Uber. Back to Uber
Sure.
in the future. Like, what are you excited about the next 5 years for Uber? Where will Uber be in 5 years? Like,
so-
what are the things that you're excited we're cooking in right now or will cook in the next couple of years?
So I think what I'm excited, what interests me is, we've kind of grown up by accident, which is we got into the mobility business. The mobility business got us into delivery business. Our being in mobility and delivery said, hey, this opportunity to freight. And all of the growth has happened in an organic way, accidental way, one way or the other. Let's find an opportunity here, let's grab it there. But if you look at our scope right now, and if you're an engineer and you were designing our system, if the first system that you built it wasn't about, rideshare. It was people are going to need on-demand transportation of people, things, shipments, anything. And I'm going to go build a system that wires up every single vehicle, that recruits every single person or robot eventually that's willing to drive that vehicle. And I'm going to wire that vehicle up, and I'm going to have real-time information on the location of that vehicle, the availability of that vehicle, essentially real-time inventory. And I'm going to wire it up, build a marketplace, and also make it available to third-party marketplaces so that anyone looking for transportation of any kind, anywhere, can on a real-time basis have a look into all the vehicles that are available. And I'm going to label those vehicles. There are going to be some vehicles that are going to be electric. Some of them can move people. Some of them can move people or things. Some of them might be a two-wheeler that can only move things. Some of them may be an e-bike that can only move people. Some of them may be a truck that can move a lot of people. Some may be a HCV that can move 15 people at the same time, et cetera. We basically label all the supply, have the real-time information of the supply available. Some of it may be high-class black car, some of it may be not so high-class, et cetera. And then essentially we open that up to all the demand in the world and say, what do you want, when do you want it, we'll match it up to you, and we'll make it available to you in real life. That's the system that we're building. We built it from the bottom up, but we're now starting to combine these marketplaces so that a driver for Uber who drives people can also get cross-dispatched into Eats. And there may be, at the end of your shift, you may want to stay in a certain neighborhood. And Eats allows you to stay usually in a certain neighborhood. The longest kind of Eats trip that you'll see is like a 3-mile trip. Ride trips can be way longer. Now you have this kind of very liquid marketplace between different types, different categories of transportation, whereas we're competing against competitors who are vertical, who only engage in one category. That ability for us to just wire up every single mode of transport and make it available to any demand for that transport, that for me is super exciting. And the opportunity is just enormous, and our engineers are just salivating at the possibility of building this thing.
So we'll end by saying, speaking of everywhere, everything, the future is here, because everywhere is now Israel, and everything are taxis.
Well, if you're not in Israel, you're nowhere,
Israel.
I said, if you're not in Israel, you're nowhere. So we could not get into Israel because Israel is still fairly highly regulated, and only taxis are allowed to transport you as a person. And we switched our strategy with Uber, which as it used to be, if it was a taxi market, we're not that with Uber. Now we are that. So there are a bunch of markets, Japan, Korea, Argentina, Turkey, that are taxi-only markets. And so Israel is one of our newest taxi-only markets. The GM is a former freight person. And so if you go back home, please use Uber. It'll work beautifully for you, and it's cheaper than the alternative. So there you go.
Yeah. I tested out a month ago. ETA is much better than Get or Yandex, sorry. Quality of ride is much better. And the team there is on a ramp and actively partnering with startups in Israel in terms of either benefits for riders or benefits for drivers. And that's a nice sort of distribution channel, I think, for companies in Israel in years to come. And yeah, super excited on finally launching in Israel.
And if you have any issues, just give Lior a call.
Always happy to. Dara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Happy 5-year Uberversary and enjoy the hummus, yeah.
I'm going to enjoy some of your stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leo. Thank you very much, Dara. And Deloitte, and this is the first event of our week-long Innovation Week, Iconic Innovation Week. Many more events. Those of you in cybersecurity, I'm looking forward to meeting you tomorrow, and the rest of you in all of our other events. So thank you, and if you want to take a more active role in our organization, find me or one of our team. Thank you to our partners, thank you to all who participated, thank you to our steering committee, to our co-chair, Oren, who's here, Oren Zev, and the rest of our steering committee. So, see you soon.